All right, here we go. I don't normally do this, but in the video that you posted, you prompted a number of questions or tried to answer a number of questions in a way that was sound and reasonable according to atheist philosophy. I'm not going to discount your use of logic. I am going to respond to the points that you made from a Christian point of view. So here we go. You start off with a teapot made entirely of ceramic and entirely made of steel, and you say the two things cannot be self-contradictory. However, there are real-world examples, certainly quantum examples, and there are even living organism examples of things that don't fit in either or categories because they're both and categories. There's a material known as cermet, which is it's a mixture of metal and ceramic, and it's a hybrid material. It's man-made. Now, from an atomic level, is it certainly both? And it's a combination of one and another thing, 50-50, absolutely. But from a material science standpoint, is it its own material? There's a reason why it's called cermet and not some other thing, is because it's a new thing that is both ceramic and metal. It's originally used for tank armor and ended up being used as to replace some titanium and some plastic parts in hip replacements. Turns out it's a fantastic thing. Another example, light particles, or light rather. Is it a wave or is it a particle? Well, actually, it's both at the same time. And it's one of the most confusing things in quantum physics that people have talked about. There are some physicists that actually referred to light as a wavicle. They've actually said it's both and combined, or it's either or at the same time, and they're really genuinely trying to figure out when is it one versus when is it other. And certainly, colloquially speaking, it's something else. It's both and. It's not either or. It is both a wave and a particle. Theoretically, in a sense, it's violating the laws of non-contradiction. Now, I know that it's a particle when it's observed, but it's a wave when it's not observed. But there are strange behavioral characteristics. We're talking Einstein's spooky action at a distance even gets involved here. That's some weird stuff. What about rotifera? Rotifera is both a plant and an animal. Well, which one is it? Is it a plant or an animal? It can't, if something is one, then it can't be both. Well, if it's A, then not B. If it's B, then not A. Here we have a living organism. That's both. It just depends on the circumstances and the coordinates. Now, I know it's a microscopic organism, but it still fits the category. I need to get on past that. Your notion of the burden of proof argument as it applies to making those assertions, either positive or negative, regarding the existence or non-existence of the Abrahamic God. Now, you do correctly point out that I, as a Christian, I have the burden of proof to explain my reasons for my belief, and I'm not going to try and discount that. You, as an atheist, or as a non-theist, or whatever phrase that you want to use, I know some people are kind of hung up on that. You have the same burden to explain your reasons for your non-belief, and you've done so in that video, and you're honest about it, and I want to thank you for that. There are a lot of people that do so without, some people do it with great accusatory language, blaming the other side for dishonesty and being all kinds of things, and you don't seem to have those qualities, but you still make some logical errors, and I just want to address those. Now, your illustrated characters of who God consists of is, you've got one overly simplistic notion of the man who lives in the clouds, per the late George Carlin. And then you have a fairly accurate description of the Trinitarian nature of God as best understood and as best endorsed by contemporary and traditional Christianity. Your definitions that you have listed starting at 4 minutes 23 seconds, that's where the rubber really hits the road. And you talk about a deist God, a transcendent and eternal being who created absolutely everything. I'm not going to dispute that claim, as that's an accurate claim. And then the Trinitarian or the Judeo-Christian God, a transcendent and eternal being who created absolutely everything, who is omnipotent, meaning that it has unlimited power, omniscient, meaning that it has unlimited knowledge, and omnipresent, meaning that it's everywhere at all times, and omnibenevolent, meaning that it's all loving and infinitely good. A little bit later you add, this being is also defined as just, merciful, and responsible for imbuing mankind with free will. Now, I'm glad you acknowledge the difficulty of placing a deist definition inside the notion of absolute certainty. You also make a flaw, but you make a flaw in your logic when you're trying to disprove the notion of the Trinitarian God. This is the point that I want to get at. It's your misconception of God that's causing you to start from a faulty, you're starting at a faulty start point, which is leading you down the wrong path, and you think you've solved the problem. But Christians have answers for your questions. You may not agree with them, but I just want to present them here. Now, scientifically speaking, we know the universe had a beginning. That's not is not in contest here, and I'm not going to contest either. It's something that I believe in. The universe had a beginning. Space, matter, energy, and time. They all came into existence at the exact same moment. Most every cosmologist is going to hold that as non-contestable. Commonly referred to as the Big Bang. Scientists can clumsily attempt to describe before the Big Bang, and they say there was nothing. So even though we understand there's no such thing as before the Big Bang, because when time began, there was no time before time began. So we're already starting to encounter some clumsiness, but the scientists are trying to describe a temporal causal relationship outside our understanding of and our existence within space-time. Aristotle defined nothing as that which rocks dream about. And if that is what existed before the universe came to existence, I'm not going to contest that either. Now, it's a solid logical premise that nothing has any causal agency, nor does it have a capability to create. Okay, there's nothing defined as that which rocks dream about. There's no matter, there's no energy, there's no space, there's no time. There is absolutely no ability, I'll add the parentheses, that we have any knowledge of. There's no ability for anything to be created from that. So we're instantly, automatically stuck at what happened, what caused the Big Bang. Now, science is very, very quick to say we don't know, but they will very quickly add, but it could not be God. There are a number of scientists that will posit the multiverse. Okay, they'll posit, multiverse seems to be the fashionable thing right now. You don't hear much about the oscillation theory. The steady state model has been debunked thoroughly from not only from a mathematical standpoint, but from a theoretical standpoint as well, I think. But what about this? Speaking in metaphor, in the beginning, or more accurately, at the beginning, time, God created energy, the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. Now, this is not a statement that a scientist would make in the laboratory, but it is a metaphorical statement that reflects accurate scientific reality. I'll firmly admit the possibility of confirmation bias here, but it fits. Now, does Scripture make this wrong? Make the point wrong? No, I think we can say the metaphor accurately describes known scientific data. Now, this can be chalked up to the difference between literal and literalistic. We can take the literal description of the metaphor is making and accept the parallel with scientific data, or we can critique the metaphor for its lack of literalistic accuracy of scientific data. There's a difference there, and I think you've fallen into that trap. Do we know with absolute certainty there is a multiverse where our universe is just one of countless other universes? No, we don't. But it is a very fashionable theoretical framework that people are experimenting with. And they will very quickly say, but we have no capability to prove nor disprove it. So you're very quick to disprove the notion of God, but there are a lot of scientists that are very quick to embrace the notion of a multiverse. That is not based in proof, that is based in a priori ideological bias. Now, I'll admit it's an article of faith that God created the universe, but likewise it's an article of faith that the multiverse exists. At some point, the absolute need for an uncaused first cause must manifest. Otherwise, we're only moving the goalposts further and further away. Eventually, you're going to you have to have an uncaused first cause, or it's turtles all the way down. There's no in between. And the Judeo-Christian belief that the benefit of the Judeo-Christian belief is that we're applying the uncaused first cause at the very first point it's needed. We're not violating Occam's razor, okay? Now, admittedly, this could be viewed as a God in the gaps argument. I'm fully aware of that. Now, further on, logic dictates that anything created is separate and distinct from that which creates it. Okay? So by definition, if God created the universe, then God is not limited by the universe. He is separate and he is distinct. Now, this is very much an argument for both a deistic and a theistic God, but I'm not going there. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian notion of God. That is a God that is involved with his creation, that he has the ability to interact with his creation, much like a painting or an artist or an architect. I think an architect is a better metaphor to use, because an architect not only designs the building, but he can enter the building and then he can leave the building, much as God can create the universe and enter the universe and then come back out. He is separate and distinct from the thing that is created. Now, you state that God's quality of omnipotence is self-contradictory, and I quote here, could an omnipotent being make a stone so heavy he could not lift it? Your quote of the ancient philosopher. Now, you're basing your assertion about the limits of God while self-limiting, no, not self-limiting, you're limiting those attributes of God to this universe. We've already logically proven God is not limited by the tenets and the physical laws of this universe. Your starting point is flawed. So you're not only assuming that any omnipotent being to be bound by the limitations of this universe to test your theory, but additionally, a stone, that stone that you want to see created by necessity, would likewise not be bound by the limitations of this universe in order to prove or disprove your theory. Thereby, we've already illustrated God is separate and distinct from the universe, making him provable or unprovable with absolute certainty. Okay, but and those are done by the scientific metrics of this universe. Okay, which are limited by this universe. However, a stone provable by the metrics of this universe would remain within the universe that God created, and that stone would obviously be affected by him. But as soon as that stone would be able to expand or somehow be made larger than the confines of this universe, we now are presented with a problem that we don't have an ability to test it or verify. Okay, so as soon as you move the stone out of this universe in an attempt to prove that such a stone could be created, you lose all ability to determine that such a stone could even exist, because you're bound to this universe and you're limited to its frame of reference regarding proof or non-proof of existence. Right? Now, respectfully, would any being with a universe transcending abilities, whoa, I just lost my notes here. Hang on. Would any being with, would any being with transcendent abilities, one more page, another page. There we go. Would any being with universe transcending abilities or characteristics or capabilities feel the need to prove itself to you in a manner of your choosing? I dare to suggest the answer to that is no. It is as if the ant is demanding that people prove its existence to the ant. I think it's a ridiculous assertion. Forgive me, but I really do. Now, Stefan Molyneux, freedomainradio.com, has illustrated kind of the limitations of the material universe by stating that here we are, and he's coming at this from a full-on atheistic point of view here. He is not, he doesn't believe in the supernatural. He's not a Christian fundamentalist. He's actually a pretty highly respectable atheist, hardcore when it comes to knowing philosophical and logical arguments. But he says, here we are, two human beings arguing the relative merits or demerits of various strains of abstract thought that have no capability or non-capability of being tested, nor proven, nor disproven in the material universe. Now you tell me, which is more real, the material universe or the abstract notions that we're trying to convey here? C.S. Lewis put it this way: a fish has, I'm paraphrasing C.S. Lewis, a fish has no concept that the water is wet. The only way the fish would know that the water is wet is if the fish was not destined to be a land animal. So metaphorically speaking, I think you and I have this ability that transcends the material universe, because for whatever reason, we have something about the non-material about us. Okay? Now you're speaking about omnipotence being intertwined with omniscience and omnipresence. And there goes my mouse again. This is awesome. I hate it when this happens. I'm going to have to clip these out. Okay. Come on. Okay. Now, you speak about omnipotence being intertwined with omniscience and omnipresence, such that the latter two are necessary but constituent parts of the first. And this implies that without one of the latter attributes, the other ones are no longer possible. Now, I think you're misunderstanding the notions that the ancient Israelis were trying to convey in this. The first of which is, well, we're not dealing with Western thought. We're not dealing with the Greco-Roman mind. We're dealing with the Hebraic mind. And various Hebraisms don't always translate cleanly. Hebraisms and the ancient Israeli thought is a little more Eastern, it's a little more, no, it's not Occidental, I believe is the word that's used. Not only do they have a concept that's both and, but they also deal with concepts that, instead of ontologically contrasting various facets of of a singular thing, they will speak about the exact same thing using different words and different terms and different phrases, all referring to the same singular object, but referring to it in different ways in order to reinforce the point that we're making. You're right in asserting that omnipresence and omniscience and omnipotence all go together. And you're right that you can't have one without the other, but none of them are dependent on the other. Whoa, come back here. Okay, so the combination of here's one of the biggies though. The combination of omniscience and free will is not contradictory. You're self-limiting your definitions to the space-time limitations of this universe, and you're not only applying it to yourself, which is normal and natural, we're creatures of this universe, but you're applying those definitions circumscribed, limited by this universe to a being that by necessity exists outside of those limitations. To God, what we refer to as past, present, and future, for God, it's a continual now, at least from our perspective. He can stop and listen to each and every single one of the prayers of people who died instantaneously when at either Nagasaki or Hiroshima. He can listen to those prayers individually, one at a time, even though instantly tens of thousands of people died. Alternately, he can take one frozen instant and stretch it out infinitely, or he can combine multiple instances into one. His observation of the time domain that we inhibit is removed from our linear existence of time. Let's explain it to you this way. J.K. Rowling came up with the idea of Horcruxes, and she presented that information in book number 2. She didn't call it that. We had no idea what it was until book number 6. Okay? Now, according to the people who living in sort of the Potter universe, they had no clues to what was going on. However, J.K. Rowling already had the idea that she was going to present in book number 6 all the way back in book number 2. Her observation, her experience of time was removed from the people, as it were, in the Potter universe that were experiencing time at that time scale. Okay? Likewise, when she gets into book number 7, and she's talking about, she's writing about the letters that Galette Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore wrote to one another in their youth. Okay, well that happened in the past in the book, but J.K. Rowling is writing at a different time. Her passage of time was different than that of the books. This is another one of the reasons why when God says, I know the end from the beginning, I know the beginning from the end, we talk about God being the author of life. His passage of time, his experience of time is something completely, totally different from ours. Now, what that means in terms of temporal causality, I've got no clue. It could be something simple as 1,000 years is a day is 1,000 years. It could be simple as he's stretching things out. I don't really know. I'll be honest. It's an item of faith, but it is an answer, and it is an answer that fits, and it is an answer that doesn't necessarily logically refute what you're saying, but it allows for both and to be true. Both omniscience, God's omniscience, and humanity's free will. Why? Because God doesn't see our future before it happens. He simply sees our future. His future is our future is his now. Our past is his now. Our present is his now. He just sees it. Maybe another illustration would help. If you're at a parade ground and the parade turns the corner a block that way, and the parade turns the corner a block that way, and you're stuck on this one block. Well, what you see here on this one block is the present. What has turned the corner there as the parade goes by this way, well, that's the past. That's already happened. What's happening over here that has yet to turn the corner, that's the future. You don't see it yet. You might catch a tiny glimpse as it's coming, but certainly not as it turns the corner and a quarter of a mile down the road. However, if you're in a blimp and you're a quarter of a mile above the parade grounds, you can see that spot where you were standing, and you can also see where the parade is dismantling itself down here at the ending of the parade route. You can also see where the parade grounds is beginning and all the floats are being assembled down at the beginning of it. You can, in a sense, you can see past, present, and future all simultaneously. You're changing your point of view. You are not limited by a linear existence within the space-time domain. Mhm. If you haven't already read it, I suggest you read Flatland by E.A. Abbott. He's got some illustrations on how moving up and down in dimensionality can help us at least explain some of what's going on. So here's another one. Reality, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence are not contradictory unless you know with absolute certainty what the attributes of this reality are supposed to be, in contrast with what they are. Now, you're positing an ought in stating that because the is of this universe is not what you have determined the universe ought to be, it disproves the notion of God. No, 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 no. You're only making a moral claim that God does not act in accordance with your own dictates. Okay, this implies that you and you alone know what ought to be for this universe, and that such is proper and correct in the state of the universe and everything in it. You're placing yourself in the position of God in order to say that God doesn't exist. Again, it's a logical flaw. Given that you have a misunderstanding about God, it's kind of understandable. Now, I understand the point that you're about making here at roughly 7:45. It's easy to imagine a universe better than this one. For example, a universe where innocent babies are not born with cancer. Now, this implies a number of things. I don't know if you thought them all through. These are the things that came right off the top of my head. Well, first is the aforementioned. You and you alone have determined what you think is right ought to be true, not necessarily what is true. Okay. Item number one. You cannot imagine there is a purpose for that child having cancer. Yes, I know that's an incredibly difficult thing to hear, and it's a rough thing for me to say as well. But have you never heard of a child of parents who have lost a child in a personal tragedy, and then they take that tragedy and that pain, and they turn it into something beautiful and fantastic for the entire community? I think a perfect example was the oh golly, Matt, what's his name? 1-800-CRIME TV. He was the guy that did America's Most Wanted for years. His child was abducted, I think sexually molested, assaulted, raped, and murdered when that child was 6. Wrote a book called Tears of Rage. Why can Walsh, something Walsh. Tom Walsh? I know it's not Joe Walsh. But think about this. Had that TV show, or no, let me back up. Had that child never been abducted, never been killed, that TV show never would have been brought about, and many other criminals would not have been caught. Think of that. Think of it for a minute. Okay? You're saying that in your world that you would create, evil such as cancer would never exist. Children getting abducted would never exist. I agree. These are horrible things. I'm not contesting that. What I am contesting is that you do not see a purpose beyond those immediate things. God, who exists outside of space-time, knows the purpose for these terrible, horrible tragedies and has in mind and has in his plan things to redeem the pain. In your world that you create, no such redemption is possible because you're sparing everyone from necessary pain. Item number 2. Do you know with absolute certainty that the future of that cancer-stricken child would be either an improvement to humanity or a detriment to humanity? You don't know. I don't know. Okay? Could that child have been someone who discovered the cure for cancer? That's entirely possible. Okay? Could that child have also grown up to be a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Dylan Klebold or a Harris, whatever Harris's name was, or maybe a Jared Lautner? You don't know. I don't know. I'm not even going to go near Godwin's Law on this one, okay? But I will concede that neither one of us knows any better than the other that the child would have benefited or harmed humanity as a whole. But it is a factor, and it is a factor that you have ignored in your calculations in determining that a better world would, by definition, not have children getting cancer. You do not know if that person would be a benefit or a harm to society, and neither do I. God, as I said before, who exists outside of space-time, does know. Why? Because our future and our past and our present is his now. Why? Because he, by definition, by necessity, exists distinct from his universe. He is not bound by the limitations of space-time as we are. Now, admittedly, I know it's an article of faith, okay, but the point you raised has an answer in the Christian world. I just want to present it. Okay, item number 3, you're forgetting a very basic part of human growth and development, and that is our emotional, intellectual, psychological health. It all depends on our overcoming hardship, whether it's financial, whether it's societal, whether it's emotional, physical. If we do not struggle at some point with something, we do not grow as individuals. Now, you seem to have deemed a universe without pain and suffering as the way that things ought to be. However, a universe without the potential for hardship is a universe with no capability, even for non-theistic, reductionist, materialistic, Darwinian evolution. There would be no move, there would be no purpose to expand and do something greater if there were no external forces demanding that we change something about ourselves in response to it, even something that causes pain. You seem to be ignoring that. Okay, your quote from Epicurus, not Epicurus, that's the other side. It's apt, but it's not unaddressed by historical Christianity. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. That's the quote. The quote continues. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Now, sorry about the dogs. Now, Vox Day, many years ago, wrote a book, and it's called The Irrational Atheist, and he coins a term for the seeming contradiction. It fits within the notion that there is a purpose and a function for hardship. Okay, he calls this term omnidirigence. And God is willing to prevent evil. God is capable of preventing evil. He has a purpose in doing otherwise. It is a purpose that may remain invisible to us, but there is a purpose and a function in it, even if we don't see. Now, God wants the people who believe in him to choose to be with him of their own free will. Now, if he did not allow us to make the choice to follow him or not follow him, then he would have a population of followers who are merely automata. Now, would anyone truly take delight in the adoration of a person who has no capability of doing otherwise? Okay? You remember the dolls that you pull the string on the back and they say, I love you. You remember that? Can you imagine a person who genuinely, honestly believes that they are receiving love from this doll? Wouldn't that be a sad excuse of a human being? So what you're doing is you're apparently, this is your notion of God. Apparently. Apparently there's no free will because he's omniscient and we love him, but we have no choice to do so, and he's awfully sad. He's a sad excuse of being, much less any deity worthy of worship. Well, I'm sorry, we have free will. So just because his past, our past, our present, our future is his eternal now, he doesn't see things before we do them. He just sees them happening. Now, from our perspective, it's before we do them. From his perspective, it's an eternal present. Let's put this another way. As a parent, there are times where we will deliberately pull back and not interfere with the actions of our children, knowing that they could either incur hardship as a result of their own actions, or they could incur hardship because of some external force. Okay? There are times where we have to pull back. If we don't, we are doing our child a disservice. Why? Because they never learn to flex their own muscles. They never learn to grow and think and develop for themselves. They've learned to be utterly and totally dependent on us. Why? Because we're the helicopter parent. We see all kinds of children doing this kind of stuff nowadays, and it's horrific. Okay? Now, it's interesting that you will probably look at a parent who's doing that to their child, being the helicopter parent, going in and complaining to the teachers, why did Susie get this horrible grade? How dare you do this? You need to give him a better grade right now. Now, you would probably rightly condemn a parent for doing that with their child. But what's strange is that you're condemning God for not doing what you condemn a human being for doing. That's a double standard, flat out. Now, this inaction on our part as a parent, it doesn't make us malevolent. Our distance, misunderstood from malevolence, suits a larger purpose than the situation at hand, a situation that we're limited in seeing. Now, maybe one note further. Do we admonish our children when they refuse to stop engaging in behavior that we believe is wrong and can cause them long-term harm? What if our child is a functioning alcoholic, or maybe they're a drug addict, maybe they're a sex addict, maybe they're violent, maybe they've got rage issues, maybe there are things that we would love to help them with, but they refuse to accept our help. Now, we have one of two options. We can either impose our will upon them, or we can cast them out. And it is an incredibly painful thing. And no parent, let me state this differently. No one who isn't a parent, any non-parent, can never know the pain of having to tell your children, you don't want our help? Fine. You don't get to stay here anymore. You don't want us telling you what to do? You don't get to stay here anymore. That does not mean we do not love the child. It means they're in the middle of a situation that they are refusing to address. It means that they are in the middle of a situation that they're refusing our help with. And we could vehemently disagree with their proposed solution. We could possibly agree on the underlying tenets of what the problem is. But our disagreement will come in the form of what solution is there in the problem. If they are insistent on doing something that we, with our additional years of knowledge, will look at and say, that's not the right solution, but they're insistent on going down that road, do we have a right to just sort of pull back and say, look, if you're going to fall and break your head, I'll be there to pick you back up. But I'm not going to sit by and I'm not going to watch it happen. You're going to go down by yourself. You're not taking us with you. We have that right as parents. God has that right. God has the right to say, you're doing something I don't approve of. I can't participate in it. I can't support it. I can't endorse it. I have a hard time even watching it. I have to, for the love of myself as an individual, and to respect your free will, I am going to turn away from you. As much pain as it's going to cause me to know that my child is willfully doing something that I would rather them not do, that I know they could do something better than that. That is a pain that so many people have no clue as to what it feels like. And you're saying that that pain doesn't exist. You're saying that pain is irrelevant. You're saying because God doesn't swoop in and solve every one of humanity's problems, it's only proof that he doesn't exist. Well, maybe he tried once. Maybe we spit in his face. You look at the Old Testament, that's pretty much what humanity did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is he both able and willing? I need to back up a second. You seem to criticize God for not insulating humanity from every possible hardship imaginable. What you fail to realize is that exact world existed in Eden, and humanity, in a state of complete innocence, messed it up. Again, this is Christian doctrine. I realize it's an article of faith. I realize there's no place that we can go to and point to and say, there's the Garden of Eden. I get that, okay? Ideologically speaking, these answer the questions and complaints that you have brought up, okay? Is he able and willing to prevent evil? Then whence cometh evil? Okay, is a hurricane, a tornado, a tsunami, an earthquake, are any of those evil? No. What if human life is lost? Well, we would call it a tragedy. We wouldn't call it evil. What about, certainly not from an atheistic viewpoint, they're events. I mean, shifting tectonic plates, random wind patterns, whether on the land or whether on the ocean. These things, they just happen. It's not an evil act, even if human life is lost. So it's not the loss of human life that's evil. Okay. What about the lion on the Serengeti who's just killed and is eating a zebra? Is that evil? Well, no. Nature's red in tooth and claw. A zebra needs to run faster than the lion to keep from being eaten, but the lion's got to eat. Okay. Now, here's where we do something. Is a man wearing a hat evil if he shoots a man because he's not wearing a hat? There's a little more context we need there in order to determine that, don't we? What if the man who's not wearing a hat is wearing a suicide vest and is threatening the lives of dozens of other people? But the man wearing a hat, that happens to be the hat of his police uniform. Is the man wearing a hat still evil? No. The man not wearing a hat is now evil. We need additional context. Mostly, we need the context that tells us what is the intent of the heart, what is the intent of the individual, and what are his actions going to be. We need to know this information before we can ascribe good or evil, either to the intent of the person or to the action of the person. Now, an evil intent, that's just an evil intent. That's a non-material thing. It's neither good nor evil. An action, on the other hand, especially one that affects others or even one that affects self, can very easily be listed as evil. But we need the intention and we need the context. We need to know these things. You are stating that because you're stating with absolute certainty God cannot exist because he's not acting within your intention of what the world ought to be. I hope you see the logical flaws there. A man with a knife cutting into the side of the woman, it'd certainly be seen as evil, unless the man is a surgeon and he's removing a tumor from the woman's abdomen. In that case, the surgeon is certainly not evil. The Not from the point of view of the woman. From the point of view of the tumor, yeah, the surgeon's evil because the tumor's going to die. That's assuming, of course, we're talking sentience on the point of the tumor, and that's kind of ridiculous. Your argument is based on logic, but you're starting from a flawed beginning point, and you're using your logic to justify your own personal morality based on your misconceptions about God. Now, to be fair, you have arrived at the only conclusions you could have arrived at, given your misconceptions about the nature of God. I'm going to grant you that. Now, as in the case of the child with the cancer, because I haven't talked about that particular instance. As the author of life, as the author of all life, God has the authority to take that life because he granted it to begin with. But more importantly, if he takes it, he also has the right and the ability to restore it. Okay? That is why murderers are treated so harshly. They have taken something that does not belong to them, and it can never be restored. God has the ability to restore that life. Again, admitting it's an article of faith. I said, but let's look at this a different way. Did J.K. Rowling have the right to kill Lavender Brown, Fred Weasley, Remus and Tonks, James and Lily, Sirius? Did she have the right to do that? What about Harry? Did she have the right? Did she have the authority to determine that Harry had to die? More importantly, did she have the authority to determine that Harry was going to get resurrected, as it were? I posit that she does, because she's the author of the book. God's the author of this universe. He created this universe. He has that ability. He has that authority. Now, I understand that I'm using the fictional world of Harry Potter to defend what I hold to be the truth of Scripture. Here's the thing, though. Fiction has the capability to speak with us, speak to us, speak through us with such a deep meaning that we don't recognize it on a subconscious level, much less a conscious level. That's why stories resonate with us so deeply. The archetypes that these stories carry, they've been with us for thousands of years. Okay? The archetypes are true even if presented fictionally. Why? Truth is truth. And I'm not even going to get into the whole fact versus truth thing, okay? Your final drive-by about a God being who is just and merciful being contradictory is answered with Jesus on the cross. God, in human form, is Jesus Christ. No, Jesus the Messiah. Christ is Christus from the Greek, meaning the anointed one. Messiah is the Hebrew, or Mashiach, also meaning anointed one, but also in the Hebrew. I don't know what it is in Aramaic. Now, God, in human form, living a perfect life. Okay? He is self-limiting all of his capabilities to the human condition. But in his ability, he is able to live a life where he does not sin. And sin just means missing the mark. It means living a life of perfect moral fiber. Okay? He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't think anything wrong. Again, a tenet of faith, I know that and I admit that. Yeah, he didn't do anything wrong. He obeyed all the rabbinical laws and the laws in the Torah. Followed every single one perfectly to the letter. Okay? No other human has the capability of doing that. To say that he is a perfect human being, if you want to say that he was self-actualized, this goes so way above and beyond self-actualization, it's amazing. Okay? Now here he is, he doesn't need to be saved from the nature of sin, but in his eternity, in his eternal nature, because he's still God, he's 100% God and he's 100% man. He's that new category that we mentioned way back at the beginning. He is self-limiting to the human condition, but he still has inherent capabilities. In that ability, not needing to be saved from the nature of sin, yet able to pardon others in his mercy, he allows justice to fall on himself by taking the penalty of sin on our behalf. On the cross, Jesus says, one of the last things he says is tetelestai. It is usually translated, it is finished. Doesn't mean it is finished. It's an accounting term and it means paid in full. Now, if I continue that accounting metaphor, if a beneficiary with hundreds of billions of dollars comes to the aid of someone and pays off hundreds of thousands of dollars in loan shark gambling debt, don't you think the person whose debt of $100,000 should live a life in appreciation of the ideals that man espoused, that beneficiary espoused? I think he should. I really do. Now, does this mean that he's going to be perfect in following those ideals? No, because we're flawed, imperfect human beings. We always strive to be better. Okay, the benefactor is not going to make them a multi-billionaire and immunizing them from the consequences of their own fiscal irresponsibility. But I mean that's justice. You're going to pay the penalty for your own fiscal responsibility. The benefactor is going to remove that justice part. He says, "I'm going to pay this for your behalf." However, that's also the mercy. But you still have to deal with the consequences of those actions. If you've got drug and alcohol problems, you need to get in rehab. You need to get cleaned up. You need to restore the relationship with your loved ones because of all the things that happen because of this. There are maybe the benefactor is going to say, "Look, I helped you out. I've got this other person over here. Just so happens you need a job. Just so happens this guy has a position that could be filled. It's a job. You know, it's a way for you to occupy yourself and get you out of this bad environment." God has the ability to do these things just as the benefactor does. So, I'm just going to sum this up. You know, your use of logic is not improper, but it starts at faulty premises. I hope and I know I'm scatterbrained, and I apologize that it's late and I've been thinking about this for a while, but I hope that I've been able to address at least some of those faulty premises. So, theologians have answers to your questions, but you have to ask. Maybe you just didn't want to hear the answer that most theologians are going to agree with. I don't know, but that also comes right back around to personal ideological bias instead of logic and reason and evidence. I don't know, but there you go. Sorry, it's a long video. I apologize. Sometimes simple questions don't get simple answers. Sometimes they get complex answers. There you go.